On April 1st, 2014, two Dutch students, Lisanne Froon, 22, and Chris Kremers, 21, left their host's family's home in Boquete, Panama, and set off on a hike that would turn into one of the most baffling unsolved mysteries of the 21st century. They were staying with a local host family while preparing to begin volunteer work with children in the town. Bright, adventurous, and organized, the two friends from Amersfoort, Netherlands, had arrived in Panama a few weeks earlier for what was supposed to be a meaningful and enriching experience abroad. That morning they set out on the El Planista Trail, a well-known route that leads through lush rainforest into the mountains. Weather conditions were good, and both were fit, enthusiastic hikers. A local dog, Azul, accompanied them part of the way. Photos later retrieved from Lisanne's Canon camera show the women in good spirits, smiling and posing together on the trail and atop the Continental Divide. These photos are time-stamped between late morning and early afternoon on April 1st, with the last seemingly ordinary image, photo 508, showing Chris crossing a shallow stream around 1 p.m. This would be the last known image taken under normal circumstances. When the women failed to return that evening, the host family became concerned. The dog returned home alone. Messages from their parents in the Netherlands went unanswered. Initially, it was assumed they may have extended their hike or stayed with friends. But the next day, on April 2nd, their absence became more worrying. They missed an appointment with a local guide they had planned to meet. That evening, police were contacted and a missing persons report was filed. Search efforts began almost immediately. Local guides, police, and indigenous Ngabe Bogle people joined forces to comb the area. By April 6th, Chris and Lisanne's families had flown in from the Netherlands with Dutch investigators, search teams, and even specially trained rescue dogs. Helicopters and aerial scans were deployed. A reward of $30,000 was offered for any information. The search lasted over 10 days and covered a wide area of the rugged highlands. Despite their efforts, no trace of the women was found. What rescuers didn't know was that Chris and Lisanne had been trying to reach help from almost the moment they disappeared. Phone logs later revealed that beginning at 4:39 p.m. on April 1st, just a few hours after the last photo was taken, Lisanne's Samsung Galaxy and Chris's iPhone 4 were used to dial emergency numbers. In total, over 77 attempts were made to call either 112, the Dutch emergency line, or 911, the Panamanian emergency number. None of these calls successfully connected, likely due to a lack of call service in the dense forest. Lisanne's phone stopped functioning on April 6th. Chris's iPhone, however, was turned on and off repeatedly in the days that followed, with its final activation occurring on April 11th. Oddly, after April 5th, the phone was turned on several times but never had the correct PIN entered again, suggesting that Chris may have become incapacitated and that someone else, possibly Lisanne or someone else entirely, was attempting to access the device without success. The evidence from these phone logs tells a harrowing story of two young women stranded, lost, or possibly in danger, attempting for days to get help that never came. They were clearly alive and fighting to survive for several days after they disappeared. Welcome to Bad Things and our new series, Still Unsolved. Join us as we dive into the case as it happened and update you with all the recent theories and developments. Clues in the camera and remains. Over 2 months later, on June 14, 2014, an Agabe woman who was working her family's farm near the Culebra River turned in a backpack to local police. She claimed she found it near a riverbank at a place called Alto Romero, roughly 12 kilometers from where Chris and Lisanne were last seen. This discovery would reignite the investigation and introduce a wave of new and deeply disturbing questions. The blue backpack, later confirmed to be Lisanne's, was strangely clean and dry, despite having supposedly been exposed to tropical rain and humidity for weeks. Inside it, investigators found a variety of personal belongings: 2 pairs of sunglasses, $83 in US cash, Lisanne's passport, a water bottle, 2 bras, both girls' phones, and the Canon PowerShot camera. More surprisingly, the electronics were undamaged and operational, with the SD card in the camera containing over 100 intact photographs. Search teams immediately returned to the area around the river. Soon after, they located a pair of Chris's denim shorts lying on a rock near the water. Witnesses gave conflicting accounts. Some said the shorts appeared neatly folded, while others insisted they were crumpled or caught on brush. Not long after, searchers began recovering human remains. First, a hiking boot containing part of a foot, later confirmed to belong to Lisanne, and then multiple bone fragments, including a pelvic bone, ribs, and a femur belonging to Chris. Autopsies and forensic analysis presented further mysteries. Chris's bones were completely clean and bleached white, consistent with prolonged sun exposure or chemical action. By contrast, Lisanne's remains showed signs of relatively recent decay, including skin and soft tissue. Experts noted that a section of Lisanne's skin appeared to be in early decomposition, suggesting it had only been dead for 2 to 3 weeks when found in August. This fueled speculation that the 2 women may not have died at the same time, or that one may have survived much longer than the other. Investigators found no signs of trauma or marks on the bones that would indicate violence, animal attack, or dismemberment. However, one local forensic expert raised concerns about unusually high levels of phosphorus in Chris's bones, something not easily explained by environmental exposure alone. Despite this, Panamanian authorities stood by their conclusion: the deaths were accidental. Then came the photos. Of the 133 images found on the camera, the first 100 were taken on April 1st and appear normal. They document the hike, the ascent, the cloud forest. Chris and Lisanne are smiling, climbing, and pausing for photos. But beginning with photo 509, things turn strange. On the night of April 8th, a full week after the girls were last seen, the camera was used again. Over 90 nighttime flash photos were taken between 1 and 4 a.m. Most of the photos are dark, seemingly of nothing. Trees, sky, brush, rocks. A few stand out: a plastic candy wrapper placed on a rock, a mirror positioned upright, and sticks with plastic bags tied to them, possibly as markers or distress signals. One photo shows what appears to be the back of someone's head, possibly Chris, though early claims that the photo showed blood were later rejected by forensic analysts. Most bizarrely, photo number 509 is missing. There is no image, only the file number. Whether it was deleted manually, corrupted due to camera malfunction, or never existed to begin with is still unknown. Given the camera's otherwise intact condition and complete photo sequence, this gap has fueled speculation that it contained something important, maybe something someone wanted to erase. The discovery of the backpack, the camera, and the partial remains gave investigators new leads, but few solid answers. If the girls had fallen into the river and drowned, why were their belongings found dry and undamaged weeks later? If they died of exposure, why were Chris's bones so thoroughly stripped? And why did Lisanne's foot still show soft tissue months after her disappearance? To many, these details hinted at something darker. If nature alone was responsible, why did the clues feel so out of place? And if someone else had a hand in their fate, had they staged a scene to make it look like an accident? What happened after that last ordinary photo remains a mystery. But with these discoveries, the case entered a new and deeply disturbing phase. Official finding versus lingering doubts. In March 2015, Panamanian authorities formally closed the investigation. They concluded that the case was a tragic hiking accident. According to this version of events, Chris and Lisanne had gotten lost after passing the summit of the trail, possibly taken a wrong turn, and ended up deep in the jungle. They may have followed a river downstream in hopes of finding a way back to civilization. Along the way, one or both of them could have been injured, perhaps by a fall or due to exhaustion, and even minor injuries in such an environment could become deadly. The remote terrain, coupled with bad weather and limited resources, sealed their fate. The Dutch investigation team that had accompanied the families largely agreed. They pointed to the 77 emergency call attempts, the progressively deteriorating phone usage patterns, and the night photos as signs that the women were trying to survive and attract attention for days. In their view, the simplest explanation was the most likely one. The women got lost, one was hurt or unable to continue, and the other eventually succumbed to the elements. When the rainy season picked up, their bodies were moved by flash floods, which also accounted for the scattered bones. To many, that explanation is rational and backed by much of the physical evidence, and the families of Chris and Lisanne, understandably devastated, publicly accepted the ruling. In interviews, they stated their gratitude for the exhaustive search and the support they received. They chose not to pursue more speculative or sinister theories. But not everyone was convinced. Skeptics point to several aspects of the case that don't fit comfortably into the accident narrative. For starters, the backpack was found clean and dry, despite the heavy rainfall typical of the region. Locals insisted it hadn't been in that spot the day before it was turned in. Then there's the condition of the bones. Why were Chris's so thoroughly stripped and bleached, while Lisanne's still had tissue? Why was there no sign of animal activity or natural damage on the bones? And what about the camera? Why were so many photos taken in complete darkness a full week after they vanished? Critics also question the conduct of the investigation. There were initial reports that Panamanian officials considered the case a homicide, only later reclassifying it as accidental. Delays in mobilizing search helicopters, inconsistencies in witness statements, and a perceived lack of forensic thoroughness have all led some to suspect that officials either rushed to close the case or overlooked key details. Some believe that pressure to protect Panama's tourism industry may have influenced the decision to rule the case an accident. Online forums, true crime enthusiasts, and independent researchers have continued to raise questions. Theories involving foul play, misidentification of remains, or deliberate cover-up continue to circulate. While many of these theories are speculative, the case remains so full of unresolved details that complete certainty remains elusive. Was this a tragic case of two hikers lost in an unforgiving landscape? Or were Chris and Lisanne the victims of something more sinister? Something that authorities, for whatever reason, failed to uncover? That tension between what is known and what might be hidden is what keeps this case alive today. Theories, old and new. Misadventure. This is the official explanation, and it remains the one most commonly accepted by authorities. According to this view, the women took a wrong turn after reaching the summit and either got lost or followed a river downhill, hoping it would lead to help. One may have been injured, the other stayed with her, and both gradually succumbed to starvation, injury, or exposure. The dark flash photos in this version were likely an attempt to signal rescuers, illuminate the terrain, or document the surroundings. Supporters of this theory emphasize the remoteness and danger of the Panamanian jungle, where cliffs, rivers, and disorientation can easily lead to disaster. Heavy rains and erosion could have moved the bodies and scattered their remains. The phone log patterns, consistent attempts early on and tapering off, and lack of clear trauma point to a drawn-out survival ordeal rather than a sudden violent end. Foul play. Others see signs of human involvement. The pristine condition of the backpack, found weeks later in an area that had supposedly been searched, raises suspicions. So does the discovery of bones after extensive initial sweeps found nothing. Some have speculated that the backpack and bones were placed after the fact, staged to make it appear accidental. Multiple locals reported seeing a red pickup truck near the trail the day the women vanished. Some claim to have seen two women matching Chris and Lisanne's description in that truck or near the road. There are questions about whether they may have accepted a ride or encountered someone dangerous on or shortly after their hike. A guide named Feliciano, who was scheduled to meet them the day after their hike, was scrutinized by online sleuths for being one of the last people to see them. However, no direct evidence ever implicated him, and he participated in search efforts. In 2022, the Lost in Panama podcast revived suspicions of foul play, featuring witnesses who claimed authorities ignored leads and downplayed inconsistencies. The podcast alleged that local corruption or fear of bad publicity may have influenced the case being quietly closed. Abduction or trafficking. Some speculate the girls were taken and held against their will. A man contacted authorities in 2014, claiming Chris had been spotted in a brothel and offered to lead police there, but he disappeared before he could be questioned. No physical evidence ever supported the trafficking theory, and it is widely viewed as unlikely by experts. Still, the idea persists in some circles. Environmental tragedy. This theory overlaps with Misadventure, but focuses on the extreme risks of the jungle: fast-moving rivers, venomous snakes, infection, and hypothermia. A single misstep could have led to fatal consequences. One woman may have been injured or died early, while the other survived for days. The contrasting states of decomposition between their remains are consistent with different times of death. Some investigators argue that natural decomposition in humid environments can bleach bones quickly, and that scavengers or flooding could have moved remains over time. From this view, the camera and backpack might have been washed downstream and preserved in a sheltered area. Cover-up or mishandling. Finally, some believe the case was either mishandled or intentionally suppressed. Early reports indicated that Panamanian authorities logged the case as a potential homicide. However, within weeks, the narrative shifted to one of accidental death. Critics point to a lack of full forensic analysis and the limited scope of the official inquiry. There are also questions about the timing and condition of the evidence. Why was photo 509 missing? Why was no third-party DNA reported from the backpack or clothing? Did the search overlook key areas, or were some clues discovered earlier and only reported later? While no definitive proof of a cover-up has emerged, mistrust of the official version persists. Combined with inconsistencies in public statements and unverified witness claims, this theory continues to attract interest from skeptics, journalists, and independent researchers. Each theory has gaps, but together they speak to the strange ambiguity of the case and why so many believe this story remains far from over. Recent developments, 2021 to 2025. Though officially closed, the case has never faded from public view. From 2021 onward, renewed investigations, podcasts, and independent research have reignited interest, and in some cases, uncovered new details. In 2021, Dutch writers Maya West and Jürgen Schnurren published an exhaustive book, Lost in the Jungle, based on full access to Panamanian police files. Originally inclined to believe foul play, their detailed analysis ultimately led them to conclude that the most likely explanation was a tragic accident. However, they acknowledged several lingering questions: the missing photo 509, the difference in decomposition, and how evidence appeared only after major searches had ended. Their work lent credibility to the accident theory while keeping the mystery alive. In late 2022, the true crime podcast Lost in Panama, hosted by Mariana Atencio and Jeremy Christ, brought fresh momentum to the case. The podcast featured interviews with new witnesses and challenged official statements. Some locals revealed that their original testimonies were altered or ignored. One man insisted he had seen the women days after their supposed disappearance. Another source said investigators were warned to stop asking questions. The podcast concluded that the case should be reopened. By early 2023, the growing public demand for answers led to new books, YouTube deep dives, and media attention around the 9th anniversary of the disappearance. Interest peaked again in 2024 with the release of Still Lost in Panama by German journalist Dr. Christian Hardinghaus and Panamanian researcher Annette Nenner. The author spent 5 months on the ground in Buquete, reviewing forensic documents, retracing the girl's route, and interviewing previously unheard witnesses. Their book presented several key insights. First, it cleared local guide Feliciano Gonzalez of suspicion, putting to rest years of online accusations. Second, it explored the identity of the driver of a red pickup truck seen near the trail on April 1st. Third, it detailed the location and condition of a nearby hut, often theorized to be where the girl sought shelter. And fourth, it investigated the presence of a red plastic bag seen in one night photo, which was never recovered with the other belongings. Hardinghaus and Nenner didn't claim to have solved the case, but they did suggest that certain investigative decisions were questionable and that the condition and timing of key evidence deserved renewed scrutiny. In interviews, they expressed hope that Panamanian authorities would reopen the case, or at least allow for more advanced forensic testing using modern tools. In early 2025, an expanded second edition of Still Lost in Panama was published, incorporating feedback from readers, new expert commentary, and follow-up interviews. The authors confirmed that multiple people had come forward with additional information since the first release. Online forums lit up with speculation, and interest surged once again. Some of the more recent suggestions include reanalyzing photo metadata for overlooked location markers, applying modern AI to reconstruct low-light images, and using next-generation DNA analysis on the backpack or clothing for trace evidence. As of mid-2025, no formal action has been announced by Panamanian prosecutors, but journalists and sleuths remain hopeful. While none of these developments has definitively cracked the case, they show that the mystery is very much alive. Whether it was misadventure, foul play, or something more complex, people still care deeply about what happened on that trail in 2014. Still unsolved. Over a decade later, the deaths of Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon remain one of the most haunting and perplexing modern mysteries. The evidence is fragmentary, the interpretations are polarizing, the truth has remained stubbornly out of reach. The official story may explain how things ended, but not why they happened the way they did. The theories each point to different realities, from a jungle tragedy to a human predator. Meanwhile, new books and podcasts continue to probe the case, searching for missed clues or a long-buried confession. For now, the rainforest that swallowed Chris and Lisanne continues to hold its secrets, and their story, marked by courage, confusion, and loss, remains what the title says: still unsolved.